Hello and welcome to the Grand Cinema Hotel, a podcast hosted by two friends who love cinema. Tonight you'll be staying in room 166, Hereditary, the horror masterclass directed by Ari Aster. So go ahead, get comfortable, and throw on that Do Not Disturb sign as we fall victim to a family curse in Hereditary.
Is there something you want to say?
Why would I want to say something so I could watch you sneer at me?
I don't ever sneer at you.
Oh, sweetie, you don't have to. You get your point across.
And say what you want to say then.
Hey, Dad.
I tried.
Try again, release yourself.
Stop.
Just say it.
Don't you ever raise your voice at me. I am your mother. All I do is worry, and all I get back is that face on your face. So full of disdain and resentment and always so annoyed. Nobody admits anything they've done.
Sorry, I know it's irrational.
Hello, and thank you for checking back in to the Grand Cinema Hotel. I'm Gus, and as always, I'm joined by Alvaro,
What's up, guys?
and we're here to kick off a very special month. We're talking about Ari Aster April. We're here today to talk about his first film, Hereditary, but I also think we're here just to talk about Ari Aster in general. Alvaro, Ari Aster, I know this is something we've talked about since the very first episode, that he was on our Mount Rushmore of horror directors and up-and-coming directors. So I may be kind of burying the lead here, but tell me how you feel about Ari Aster.
I mean, there was a couple of episodes when we first thought of the podcast, and ever since then, episodes that are just set in stone of when they would come. And then, when we found out when Beau Was Afraid had the date, we kind of knew when we would have a month to talk about the last two movies of his that we've actually been a part of. You know what I mean? We've kind of been talking a lot about franchise movies and us kind of being late to some of them. Not to Ari Aster's party, I think. I'd even seen that weird short he did a couple of years ago.
Oh,
the Johnsons.
There's something wrong with the Johnsons.
Yeah, which is really weird. But
Why aren't we covering that?
yeah, let's not. So this was something that I think both of us were anticipating, and we're really excited to talk about. He's in the Mount Rushmore, I think, because for us, this is holds a very interesting place, I think, for both of us in our history of liking films, especially because our first reactions to this movie and how I think this movie has grown so much on me, and kind of really being impressed with to me would be his directorial debut, and kind of how well even year. I mean, now it's been how long since it's been out?
5 years, almost 6.
And it just seems still just still a very matured film. You know, I think it's going to be timeless and classic.
Yeah, I mean, Ari Aster, I do think that he's very accomplished from day one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm kind of get ahead of myself here. I did not like Hereditary the first time we saw it back in 2018.
I think we've talked about this before.
Yeah, it's a film that really grew on me the second time I saw it. I do think that the first viewing of the movie was not ideal for me. I just remember being extremely tired, extremely faded, and I don't know if you remember, this was in the Movie Pass era. We actually had to go to 2 separate theaters to see this movie. We went to one thinking that let's just walk up and buy the tickets, and I remember it being sold out. So then we're like, fuck, what do we do? And then we went to another one of our local theaters later on, a few hours later than we had already planned to go.
No.
You don't remember this?
That's crazy.
So we thought we would see it at 7 o'clock, and we didn't end up seeing it till 10 o'clock. You know what I mean? So I just remember, I hate to say it, actually falling asleep halfway through the movie. So upon my second viewing, I just totally had my eyes opened and revealed.
I get it.
Yeah, I was like Danny DeVito, you know, I get it. Oh my God. And getting even more ahead of myself, upon this rewatch, which is probably the 7th to 9th time I've seen this movie, I have no problem saying that this is one of my favorite horror films of the past 5-10 years. I do think it's my favorite horror film of my lifetime. like of just all the movies since I've been born. I just think it's right there for me, and I think it stands the test of time now that we've been 5 years. I think that's a good enough amount of time to be removed and actually judge something
Test it,
without
yeah.
being like, like The Green Knight. That was one where we were both like, whoa, like I really fucking like this movie. This is an all timer. And yeah, Hereditary just really stands the test of time.
Yeah, and the fact that we kind of talked about putting them on the Rushmore, I think that's the thing that they all have in common up there, even Julia. So when it'll be interesting because we started the podcast with her once her third movie or fourth, whatever it is, her next movie is. Yeah. I think that there's a reason you led in putting those up in the Rushmore as a podcast. And again, this kind of Eggers had to start like that for us too, where it just seems like those levels that certain directors have taken years to get to, it seems like they've cut those years, right? And
yeah, it feels like there's so many years of them not making movies that by the time they finally did, it was so accomplished and so such a heavy vision.
They're so sure of themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Like I never for a second think that Ari Aster is doubting himself in Hereditary or Robert Eggers in The Witch. Like there's just a certain level of confidence that like to have like a basketball reference, it's like a LeBron James or like a Paolo Banchero, where it's just like this is day one domination, and I'm just fucking here for it.
Because even I would say the other two in there, which is Jordan Peele and Julia, I would say that their first films still feel like they're treading the waters. Like they were a little careful to be like, let's see if people like this. But Eggers and Ari Aster, I think they were just so sure of what they were going in to do and how their direction towards any of the films that they've made so far that I've seen, even their shorts or anything, they just seem so tension filled. When necessarily, I think it's something we'll probably get into a little later, because for this movie, I think I've had a lot of because it's been 5 years and it's pretty recent. I think I've had a lot of what would I call it, I've surveyed this movie a lot. You know what I mean? About the general public in terms of them liking it, which I do not think most people do besides movie heads.
Really?
Yeah.
That's funny because I feel like I have an opposite reaction. Like I've shown this movie to like older people, people who I didn't really think, or people who say they like horror movies, but they hadn't seen Hereditary, and like I've luckily enough haven't come across somebody who didn't like the movie when I showed it to them. I remember one that really hit me was that one of the reasons I love horror so much is because of my dad, right? And one day me and my dad were sitting here, it's probably like 2019, and he's like, they don't make any fucking scary, like good scary movies anymore. And I was like, okay, do you have time right now? Like, let's sit down and watch this. And by the end of Hereditary, my dad was like, holy fuck, that's the scariest movie I've seen since like The Exorcist, because like that to him is the gold standard. So not to say like my dad is the end all be all of movie opinions or anything, but just I have luckily enough come across people who are also like, holy fuck, like thank you for showing me that. That was extremely good. So it's funny that you say that though, because we've had differing reactions to this.
Because I would say in retrospect, this is when the A24 term, like a A24 movie, kind of held more weight than it does now. In terms of, we kind of talked about this in previous episodes, I think it's safe to say that even though they are a smaller studio, they are very mainstream now. But this at the time with The Witch and stuff like that was forefronting what people were calling elevated horror, quote unquote, which is a term that's dead on I feel like even now, even within a couple years. But I think that's the reason I would say that the survey that I've taken of the movie seems to people don't really enjoy, because I think they go expecting, especially at the time when it first came out, they went expecting something else.
Maybe they are expecting like a James Wan movie.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Which
like
I love James Wan as well, but I like that this isn't that. Which I do see a lot of James Wan.
Yeah,
here,
that's like I will say that I think that because he's referenced to when we saw it, and I remember we saw it with your wife. Now all three of us saw it together, and I think this was during the time when we were big time chiefers, so we definitely were very under the influence. So I think that played a big role in terms of me expecting a John Wick of scary movies. Like this should keep me up, and that's not what this is at all. And then after years of sitting on it and rewatching it, I think kind of going back to how we started this whole conversation, this movie is so meticulous, and I think that when it does turn up to the horror, when you do find out what's going on, I think you kind of if you could put yourself in that situation, you could understand how scary it is. But I think people just still expect this kind of this Exorcist type movie, which I think obviously Ari Aster already understands why remake The Exorcist. It's good. It's perfect.
Yeah, you don't need to do that.
So let's do something different, which I think at the time I didn't appreciate, which now I think in retrospect, especially watching it for reading up for this episode, just really realizing how from the first frame of this movie, everything is already in on a plan, which is similar to the whole story, right? And I think that we're just already put in the perfect time frame to understand that.
You know, I think the marriage of Ari Aster's meticulousness and then the story itself being about this like long planned out familial curse, I do think they just go so hand in hand. Like, of course, a guy who's this meticulous made a movie about like such a meticulous group of like demon worshippers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that they planned every intricate little detail from the second that somebody was born to, you know, what Peter's probably like 17, 16 years old, you know? So like they've been planning this for 17, 16 years and it went exactly how they imagined it.
I just think he perfectly understands the same concept. You know, whenever they draw the propaganda stuff of the guy being chased with the knife, but then they zoom it in and it looks like the guy who's being chased has the knife chasing the other guy. And I think Ari Aster understands that dynamic to a T, because he understands that when you're put in a movie, you're only given so much information and can be revealed any more information at the time that the director chooses to, which is something I think it's easier said than done. I think every director kind of goes in knowing that, but Ari Aster knows that, like, if I could very well make you think that this is happening, did you expect, you know, to be conned in this movie? I don't think so. But
yeah, you know, one thing I wanted to go back and say was, since you were talking about A24, I do think that this is one of those movies that really fits into the like the quilt of what A24 is. You know, like I do think that this movie helped push A24 and their boundaries and more mainstream in a way that maybe something else hadn't before. You know, like I think of the other movies like Moonlight, Ex Machina, Lady Bird, The Green Room, and
Spring Breakers.
And yeah, I mean,
Too
I
soon.
get you, but no, like I'm not saying. Yes, as in terms of like relevance of like, well, what's this movie? Oh, it's from a studio called A24. But I do think Moonlight, Lady Bird, Ex Machina, The Green Room,
elevated to like
and
big.
Hereditary are the big dogs of like, this is what made you take A24 serious. Like, oh, they're making things that are different. Lady Bird and Moonlight have like the awards behind them. You know what I mean? I don't know if Lady Bird actually has awards, but you know, that recognition of like the Academy noticing them from a kind of early stage.
Ex
And then
Machina.
Hereditary, believe it or not, it's kind of crazy to think in retrospect, because this is not something I ever really put much thought into. This was the most successful A24 film before Everything Everywhere All at Once. This thing absolutely did bonkers at the box office. So we had a $10 million budget, which is used beautifully with these dollhouse like sets and just the overall aesthetic of the film. I do think that it's all going to a good use. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like there's anything going to waste here, and I feel like all $10 million was used to forefront the film and make it as good as Ari Aster imagined it in his head. And then to make $82 million, like, you don't have to be a mathematician to be like, that's a huge fucking profit.
Do you remember off the top of your head how much Everything Everywhere All at Once cost?
100. Oh no, well, it made 100, but it cost probably like 5 to 10.
Because I was gonna say,
I have to look it up, but go ahead.
we love both of those movies, but I was gonna say that if their budget is similar to is what I was thinking. Everything Everywhere All at Once used a lot of that funding, and
14 mil.
oh, so it
25
is
mil. 14 to 25, and it made 133 overall.
I was gonna say it seems like Everything Everywhere All at Once was more used on, let's say, the bigger names, and also kind of doing the effects, but the quote unquote sets on Everything Everywhere All at Once don't seem as beautiful as this movie.
No, definitely not, dude. Like, Ari Aster really does have a look to his movies, and I think there's something I'm going to say it twice, but I think there's something beautiful about choosing to make such beautiful horror movies. Because like with Midsummer taking place in the daytime for the most part, like I was so shocked when I saw Midsummer for the first time. Like I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Like, wow, this is one of the most gorgeous films I've seen in a very long time, and for it to be like such a horrible thing,
yeah.
Yeah, man. I'm Hereditary. I also think that the hype was so fucking real. Like I don't know if you remember just how hyped up this movie really was when it was coming out.
Yeah, I mean, you had mentioned because you remembered that it was sold out. So I think that's especially we're talking about 5 years ago for an A24 movie. We've talked about in other previous episodes that people always show out for horror, but for a movie that necessarily nobody knew who the director was, and there's actors here that we obviously know, but they weren't exactly popping at the time. I mean, Toni Collette has probably had because of this movie, has had more people be interested in her.
Yeah, because she's had a lot of ups and downs in her careers. I mean, dude, she's been in Signs, or not Signs, sorry. She was in The Sixth Sense, so
yeah.
She's not that unfamiliar with horror, but I do know that when she was originally cast in this movie that she was very hesitant to take the role because she was kind of like, horror. And I do think that the big winner here, though, is obviously it's Toni Collette. Like that's a boring conversation to have, right?
Right, yeah.
But I do think that Alex Wolff is
I would say
really
that too.
phenomenal performance, and he's right up there with her.
I mean,
I think that's made him a real actor.
Yeah, because he's been in movies where I think I could say that he's made interesting choices. I know he was in Old.
And he's just batshit gonzo in that movie. It's like a 6-year-old in a 15-year-old's body or whatever.
Yeah, and then he's in Pig. And then I think in Pig he does a really good job too. So I am excited for, especially having grown up with the Naked Brothers band being not a show that I watched, but a show that I was aware of. So it's always cool to see that.
Yeah. So I know that Ari Aster had written the role with Toni Collette in mind, and that's kind of a dangerous game to play because what are you going to do if you can't cast Toni Collette? Are you just going to be like, well, this doesn't work?
Miss Mamma Mia.
Yeah, but Mafia
Mama,
right? Or is it Mafia Mia?
Something like
I
that.
don't know. This is what she chose to do after. I was like, maybe you should stick with horror because you're really fucking good at that.
Sorry, I threw that.
Yeah. Anywho.
Kind of pointing to what I meant about her career.
But also, Gabriel Byrne, he's kind of it's tough to say legend, but I think of The Usual Suspects and some of those other movies that he was in the 90s where, he's been kicking around for a very long time. And then Millie Shapiro, I don't know if she has been in anything since Hereditary, but, her as Charlie is just so fucking unsettling, like you look at her and you're like, yeah, she's definitely possessed by a demon.
Yeah, she's been in like one other small film, like an 18-minute short after this. That's the one that I was most interested in because I think for her to hold 30% of the runtime on this movie, I think, and for her to actually hold, I don't know, a presence throughout the whole time, and then holding a iconic, everlasting.
Right? It's become iconic. What's one thing I wanted to say? Is because you were talking about Ari Aster and kind of the hype going into the movie. The interesting thing about that is that the short, the Johnsons short film or whatever, that was in 2011, bro.
Yeah.
Like, so there was a 7-year gap between that movie or that short film and Hereditary. So it doesn't feel like it was a manipulated hype, but I just couldn't believe at the time that, they were calling it the scariest movie since The Exorcist, like there's this horror, like not a convention, but like, I guess like I don't know, like a gala, some kind of like film festival type of thing where they show horror movies only. And I remember coming out of that's where the hype was like, holy fuck. It was that and Suspiria in 2019, I believe, that were like these, when the hype comes out of there, it's usually like, okay, you can believe this because this is
Fangoria or what?
Yeah, like imagine like Fangoria had a fucking gala or some kind of event where they show trailers and whatever, and like when the Hereditary trailer dropped, it was like, holy shit, the scariest movie since The Exorcist is gonna come out. And for me personally, it is the scariest movie since The Exorcist, and I do think it's just because it hits me in a very, very personal way that I don't necessarily want to get into, but this is, I would say, is the most relatable horror movie to me of all the horror movies I've ever seen. You know, like I remember feeling like this in certain times of my life when certain people passed away and things like that, and how it really does like destroy and break up a family, you know, and just to see that obviously movie dreamlike twist of oh, your family's been cursed this entire time, you know, you guys are really just here to deliver us the vessel for the, you know, one of the 8 kings of hell. It's just one of those ultimate movie twists that I really fucking, this is what I'm here for, you know.
Yeah.
And it's God, it's stuck with me. I honestly think about this movie like at least once a week.
Yeah, no, I mean, for a movie that I've only seen, I think this was the third or fourth time that I had re-seen it. I think about this movie a lot too. Not obviously once a week, but I think obviously I have a poster of it in my room. You know what I mean? I just think after seeing it yesterday again, it's one of those movies that I really felt like I didn't get it when I first walked out.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I have no issue being like, it wasn't smart. I knew what it was saying. I just thought it was stupid. No, I really didn't understand. And then every time I do watch it, so many intricate little things in the dialogue that they say, or Toni Collette's character, especially because right now we're kind of just playing it in silent. But when she's talking about the relationship she had with her mother and how she treated Charlie, and every sentence on there, like I said, Ari Aster knows that there's dialogue that should be talked, or if there's dialogue written, it's not for any reason. Like, oh, let's not waste this.
He's not wasting one line of dialogue in this entire film. And yeah, the more you watch it, the more it reveals itself. And hey, if you got it 100%, A+ on the first try, good for you. You know, you're a movie genius. You never need to rewatch anything. But for me, every time I watch it, it reveals a little more and more, even if it's just some small, tiny detail that makes it one of those movies that is so rewarding to revisit, you know?
So I guess I'm from the get go, even from watching it this time, I'm just like, from what is Charlie's cognizance in this whole plot?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, is she completely? Well, obviously we're doing spoilers. This movie's kind of
Yeah,
old,
it's
but,
been 5 years, and I'm pretty sure you've probably seen this if you're listening to this podcast.
yeah, I mean, it's like, hey, is she very aware from the get go that she is payment and down with the plot? You know, and those are the things that I'm like, from watching the movie, the way that she talks about the story, when she's sleepwalking, quote unquote, and gonna like, she throws kerosene on all 3 of them. Like, if it makes it seem like Charlie was just a little girl at that point, but then there's aspects in the movie that make you think this has been plotted since day one, right? So
Yeah.
it's stuff like that that really makes me like.
So
damn,
what you
this
were
movie's-
saying about the like not getting it the first time, I do think it's probably just because of the situation that we were in at the time, but also this movie really is 2 separate halves, you know.
Yeah.
And the most popular example of a movie like that being 2 separate halves completely is like Full Metal Jacket, you know. And who thought we'd be talking about Full Metal Jacket when we're discussing Hereditary? But that switch halfway through, you know, the first hour, because this movie's like 2 hours, I think, like right on the dot.
It's like 2 hours,
that.
like 10 or something like that.
That first half is pure family drama.
Yeah.
You know, and I could understand how, like you're saying, if you think it was going to be like the John Wick of horror movies where it's just balls to the walls for 2 hours straight, I could see how you might be a little off put by that. But like I said, the older I've gotten, the more mature I've gotten, the more I've reflected on my family and the things that we've been through. I've just, you know, this is the kind of movie that helps me understand my parents. You know what I mean? Where I'm like, fuck, this must be what it's like when you lose a parent and you're also a parent and you feel so lost, and how it could feel like you want to die as well because of all the you know, the pain that you've been through. But, you know, because we live in reality, fucking your family's obviously not cursed. This is just something that everyone goes through at one point or another. And I think that's what makes it so relatable. And I think that's why the first half of the film, I don't want to say it's better than the second half, but for me, that's really the gut-wrenching, heartbreaking part of the movie. It isn't the shocking balls to the walls horror. It's just those small moments that, like, I'm your mother. You know what I mean? Like, just those things like that where I'm like, everybody has been through these things at one point in their life, you know? Like, come on, everybody's mom has snapped at them once where it scared you. You know what I mean? And to see it put to film like that, I don't know, man. Maybe I'm just, you know, uncultured and I haven't seen enough family dramas. But for me, this is the one that's like, ooh, I felt that, you know? And it just fucking gets me every time, dude. Like, I haven't really ever cried in a horror movie, but that first hour of Hereditary just like it breaks me the way like After Sun broke me. You know what I mean? Where it just fucking hits me in the heart. It's a fucking gut punch. And then to have that crazy ratcheted up horror in the last hour, my favorite genre. So it's like this is just one of the most satisfying movies I've ever seen, and I could go on and on and on just gushing about how much I love this movie in a way that isn't interesting at all. Just like, oh, in this part, and this part, and this part, But yeah, man, I'm glad we're here finally getting this off our chest because I've been waiting since October of 2021 to talk about this fucking movie on the podcast.
This and The Green Knight.
Yeah, right. And like The Green Knight was another one of those ones where I was just, it's almost like I'm sad that we did The Green Knight and I'm sad that we're doing this because when are we going to talk about this again?
Yeah. I will say, kind of just adding to a prior thing that you were talking about, that the movie being sold out, and I mean, we're 5 years removed and we're sitting here talking about it, which I think maybe the day that we saw this movie would have thought. But also the fact that Beau Was Afraid is coming out, and it's going to be A24's biggest budgeted movie that they've ever.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, they've put the most money that they've ever put into a film here, and I think that kind of just shows to what we're talking about. Them trusting Ari Aster completely, them being able to be like, yeah, you're the other person, or we're the person that deserves us doing this for. It could have probably been Eggers too, but the fact that Eggers kind of went somewhere else for the Northman, I think Ari Aster's like, I'm your boy. Like, I'm here, and I'll make movies with you guys. And A24 is like, yeah, we'll spend the money. And I think it's because Hereditary kind of brought him that fame. A lot of people liked it. I don't know how well Midsommar did, but I know they didn't lose money on that movie.
I don't think it did.
But I think the fact that they just trust him so much, and even A24 is very selective about their various movies that they roll out every year, and which movies they choose for years to keep promoting. And this movie is one of those movies that they just completely, even on their promo stuff, just keep cranking out. The Toni Collette pins are like a hot seller, you know what I mean, on the A24 shop. So like you said, this is a staple piece to what I think A24 has become.
This is one of the most culturally relevant A24 movies.
And I think literally up until Everything Ever All at Once, if people knew what an A24 movie was, this was, I think, number one. And The Witch, but for them to see completely the studio trust him, I think just really speaks on the maturity he's had since Hereditary. And I kind of wanted to go to like the first frame because I was watching it yesterday and just was pausing it a lot more to really just pay attention. I think the first shot is them kind of just showing the model houses, right? Mm-hmm. And she has this whole relationship with the model houses. But I think, again, kind of talking about how that in itself is, they are the pieces in the model world, right? Something that I completely would have not paid attention to the first time I saw this.
Yeah.
Why would I have really cared to put that much attention to the first frame of the movie? Especially back then, I wouldn't have, and I don't really feel bad about admitting that. Mm-hmm. I just think it's a maturity level thing. And to watching it, I think this movie only gets better after you've seen it repeated times, because you know what you're looking out for, and you know that it's actually been there the whole time. And I think this movie actually is one of those movies that tests you to become a better movie viewer. Which,
like I said, it's very rewarding on every rewatch.
Yeah.
You learn more and more every single time. Just every small little detail that he put into this movie.
To make participation in watching a movie be fun in that way, where you reveal to yourself, like, how did I not catch that? And just kind of honestly learn from the movie, I think is what really makes me feel like this is a film that stands out to me. I know outstanding seems to be a word maybe people use for everything, but literally this movie has stood out from the various movies. I mean, we watched so many movies, and it's still just there were scenes in this that I remembered so clearly, and it's been a while since I had seen it, and I think sometimes some of the movies just become blurs,
Yeah, no, for sure.
Another movie that I think, or just because it's funny, because that's probably what we were planning to do, but I kept thinking, like, this is what Endisman thought it was doing, like something like Hereditary. Like, you're setting up this whole trauma, this whole, like, all of this has happened, and you're being put in as the audience to check this out, and isn't this crazy? but I think Hereditary is it's showing how when it's done really well and when it's effective, and then as opposed to something like Ennisman where it's just like you're trying to trip me out, but there's nothing here to trip me out.
Yeah, I mean, let's not get it twisted. This movie is entertaining as hell.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's boring. I don't think it's pretentious. I don't think it's any of the reasons why someone who's like, oh, I turn my brain off when I go to the movies and I just want to have a good time. I think that's what this movie does as well.
Yeah.
And if you want to dig in more, that's where the reward really is. That's where you really get to the good stuff. That gooey, juicy middle, But if you want to just watch it surface level as a horror movie, along with like the family drama aspects, I think you're still in for a good time. And like that first rewatch, really did that for me. Like I don't remember how long it took me to rewatch Hereditary after the first viewing, but I do remember it was pretty soon.
Yeah,
I was like, I can't be fair to this movie because I fell asleep while I was watching it. But yeah, like it has taught me to have an appreciation for film that I didn't have 5 years ago. Like I always loved movies, but this was one of those movies for me that was seminal and like oh shit, this is more than just, I don't want to say more than just entertainment, because I guess I never really thought about movies that way. I really do think of movies as the best art form. You know what I mean? Like I think it's the all encompassing ultimate art form. It could have everything in it. But Hereditary is one of those films for me that stands out as like, I was there and this was my movie of holy shit, like you can do this, you know what I mean? And it's only grown and grown. But yeah, I think we should probably get into the synopsis, at least for those who haven't seen it, right?
Yeah, I will say that what you're saying makes complete sense. I think there is the whole, for a lot of the college poster kids, it was, Fight Club or Pulp Fiction. And those are the movies that, in certain eras for people, or I don't even say certain ages, because it could be any age that you start watching movies, kind of just challenged you to think that movies could be just more than narrative structure that is straight, right? That is just very like, here's every spoonful in sequence, and here you go. There's the full thing.
It also taught me to enjoy horror movies in a way I didn't when I was younger, because we really never really talk about our age that much, but we're both 28 years old. So we were 23 when we saw this movie, and if you hear me say like this movie was seminal in my movie education and things like that, you have to realize I was 23 years old when I saw this. So it's not like I was fucking, oh man, who's really great? Andrei Tarkovsky or Ingmar Bergman, but like movies like Hereditary, thankfully, are the reason why I was like, holy shit, there's this whole other world. When I was 23 years old, Quentin Tarantino and Steven Spielberg were the only filmmakers that mattered. I was Star Wars, Glupshido, Marvel, you know what I mean? Like, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but Hereditary, The Babadook, The Witch, those kind of movies really just fucking like, oh, holy shit, The Exorcist is not only one of the scariest movies I've ever seen, it's this deeply disturbing story about a single mother and, the trials and tribulations that she goes through, and how, or fucking, what is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre saying about America, and not just, a guy wearing a mask, like it just taught me so much, and it gave me such an appreciation for film as a whole. And like, I think, if I ever met Ari Aster, I think that would be the one thing I wanted to tell him, is like, your film taught me so much about film in general that I never think I would have opened that curtain or, seen what was beyond if it wasn't for something like this.
Yeah. I mean, I think before a movie like this, I think for me, maybe the activating point in terms like that might have been a little after, but I think it was just a little slower, because for me it feels like it was like The Lighthouse in terms of going like, oh wait, because I think jokingly, before that in the age that we were talking about, I saw movies kind of like The Office bit of like the art film movie, you know what I mean? And there was some time in our youth when for some reason we would enjoy other stuff that were quote unquote maybe even snobbier, and we'd go to museums and we saw like an art house film, remember it? It was just really weird stuff. And I remember at that age, if anything kind of had an attribute to that verbiage, I would just assume it was some weird stuff, that it wasn't narrative or whatever. But it wasn't up until movies like Hereditary, which I don't think this movie is in any way this crazy artsy stuff. I just think it takes itself more serious than people give it the credit to, or that most people in his position would have attacked the subject. But I think that it was the fact that I also really enjoyed the movies, and I wasn't just like, oh, this is really good because it's artsy. No, I just really felt like I get it. Like we were making the joke, like, oh no, this is really good because this is really artsy, but I can still very obviously understand what it is they're drawing from, what it is, the themes that they're, and then it kind of made me really interested in movies the same way that I was as a kid with books.
Yeah, no, like being 23 when I saw this, and like probably 24 when I rewatched it, and I'm like, oh shit, like this is about the horror of a family falling apart. And like I never thought about that before when I was younger like that, you know? Like I just thought like, oh, it wasn't even that scary. It took forever to get scary.
Yeah.
You know, and then
exactly.
like realizing the older I get, like, oh fuck, like the scariest part of this movie isn't her chopping her head off. It's the fact that this family can disintegrate so fast. You know, it's like they were ready to fall apart before, like much like The Shining, he was ready to kill his family before he even got to the hotel. Like this family was ready to fall apart, and to watch that linchpin be pulled and the whole thing to unravel in such a satisfying way it was really something else for me.
I think something else that really hit with this movie too, and it's something maybe we haven't talked about this movie, but in the podcast a lot, but it's in all honesty, the reason why we made a podcast and why the reason sometimes we are so on top of new movies. It's something like The Shining came out at the time. The right people knew it was brilliance, right? There is strings you could draw to Hereditary that obviously we always talk about The Shining being the magnum opus, but that they have very similar ways of addressing their story.
Mm-hmm.
And if The Shining is the magnum opus and so great, if a movie that comes out that is very likely or very close to it or executed just as well, I think it feels really well as a viewer to be one of the first to forefront that and be like, I'm ready to throw this one in there, like it's as good as The Shining. And I think to kind of give it also, because sometimes we talk about it being out so early, you might want to be like, this is the best movie I've seen. But I think there's certain ones that you could just feel it. You know, you're just like, as somebody if you start studying the history of cinema and you start seeing what are the common threads of movies that I could watch 60 years from now, 50, 40, like The Shining, and still be effective, I think it passes all of those. You know what I mean?
You know, like even The Shining, that was a movie I've loved ever since I was really young. But you know, the older I get too, and I'm like, the more it reveals itself to me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And like even when I was a kid, 11, 12 years old, and I seen The Shining for the first time, I didn't think about like this is the destruction of a man.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? I
yeah.
was just like, holy shit, that's
Just
scary
creepy.
as fuck.
Yeah.
You know, and what I did want to say is that I did want to get back to the synopsis a little bit, right? Do you have it, or do you want to just kind of riff on what it is?
So I have it right here.
Go ahead.
So it says, when Ellen, the matriarch of the Graham family, passes away, her daughter's family begins to unravel cryptic and increasingly terrifying secrets about their ancestry. I think that's something that is very prevalent from the first frames of this movie. They highlight the chain almost like in the first couple of scenes. I completely missed, and I'm sure maybe you did the first time too, it being on the post, which I mean that
it's like the Rockefeller chain for this cult. Huh?
The second
like you get the rock chain.
The second time I saw the movie and I seen that, it's like, oh my god, like I'm the moron.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, dude, it's right there, you know, and that's what I mean. Where it's like, how long ago was Charlie in on this? You know what I mean? Like, or how, what? Like, so I think stuff like that is like, there's the first half of the movie that you're talking about kind of deals with what you would talk about. You could think that the curse that this family has is the same way that, you know, families in real life are cursed with alcoholism, right? And this kind of has a dynamic even where she's kind of similar to like an AA meeting. And the first half of the movie kind of tackles those tensions that you might have with a child of yours or a mother of yours, depending on which side of the bracket you're on.
You know, I like that you bring up the alcoholism thing because this family's high as fuck.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Charlie, I don't know. I don't think they show her taking anything, but like, you know, Peter is literally high as fuck on weed almost the entire movie, right? the dad is popping pills left and right. Like there's one sequence where he like loses his shit kind of after like a long night, and he's taking his sleeping pills, and he decides to take an extra one. You know, like Annie at the first seance, or when she's at the seance, you know, she's popping a couple pills. And like I do think that was something I didn't really pay attention to the first time, but then when I did, and I'm like, not only is he talking about like the, you know, the hereditary aspects of like your family being cursed and how this has been there like since the beginning, but just also like this addiction too that they have, you know, like they're all under the influence of something. And like, you know, is it payment? Is it this? Is it that? You know, like, is it just the trauma that they've been through, or like the grief that they're all going through with these losses and stuff like that? Like, it just begs so many questions, you know?
Because when you're first watching the movie and the first time that I saw it, it seems like if you were able to reflect and you pause in the middle of the movie and like, okay, what do you think? It seems that they might be a family that is into that because they have a lot of disconnection between them and a lot of pain and a lot of guilt that stems from the grandma not having a relationship with the mom, you know, and then the mom not having a great relationship with the kids. And that seems to be the hereditary curse. If you were to just stop the movie there, be like, I think it's that all of them, like you said, are under the substance of trying to keep this pain down and holding it, or trying to numb this disconnection that they have between each other.
It's that generational pain, you know?
That's what you would think. But like you said, at the half of the movie,
the first hour, you know?
Yeah,
because like they just sprinkle in the little ghost shit here and there. Like, you know, after Annie's mother's funeral, she sees her in the corner, you know, and then Charlie sees her naked in the field with the fire, and like
that's when it becomes like, that's what I mean about on rewatch. Those things I completely, the first time I saw it, I did not pay any attention to, is her seeing her grandma and the grandma being actively part of rituals in front of her. And and Charlie's the only one that seems to be able to see this because I mean,
well, she's payment. Yeah. She is for a bit, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I like that you kind of brought up that at what point do you think is it payment for all of them? Because I think after a certain point when you find out what it looks like when he takes over, that really makes you question, like, this has been going on for a long time then, obviously. And you kind of figure out, okay, like the sleepwalking has to be that too. Everything that Charlie does has to be that. This has all been set up to go into, you know, Alex Wolff's character. And the dad just really is an innocent bystander, which is why I think Payman just does not fuck with them.
Yeah, like, I don't want to say I feel bad for the dad, but man, does he just have like an unlucky fucking break, you know? Like,
he's trying to take care of his kid.
Yeah, like, and when I was rewatching it yesterday, like, I told my wife, she's like, do you feel bad for him? And I was like, I do and I don't, you know, because he's dealing with the loss of his daughter and the fact that his son killed his daughter, but he's also dealing with his wife who just lost her mother, and you could tell that he's never been fond of the mother, you know, because like when Peter's like, he's like, oh, are you sad? And he's like, and he's like, I get it. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just feel like he's in this position where he doesn't really have the choice or chance to grieve. And, you know, he's trying to hold this family together. And, like, what can he do? You know, like, the mom's going to lose her shit. The son's a murderer. His daughter's dead. He has nowhere to kind of hide and have his own moment, except for one moment in the film where he picks Peter up from school after he has his freak out where he breaks his nose, and he just starts breaking down and crying in the car. And that's really the only chance you get to see where he has that moment to kind of reflect on, like, this is all happening to me too, you know, because it's so Annie driven for the whole movie. And then just to see him get set on fire like that, you're just like, man, my boy's had this shit unlucky. Because, you know, like when he gets Annie and he's like, oh, dinner's ready. And she's like, I'm going to make dinner. And he's like, no, I already made the dinner. Come, don't come. I really don't give a shit. Or like when he tells her, like, I have a son to protect. And like, what does that mean? You know, like, he just, that's why I'm like, I don't want to say it's unfair because, you know, he's not really going through the most. Annie, obviously, she lost her daughter. She lost her mother, you know. This is a different connection than he has to those two characters. But I just fucking feel bad for him every time I watch the movie. I'm like, this guy got a tough break because he's not like the boyfriend from Midsummer where you're like, yeah, sis, put his ass in a bear and burn him on fire. You're like, I really don't think he deserved the cards he was dealt, to be honest. And then he married into the psycho family. You know what
I was gonna say is, I think, interestingly enough, this is kind of thinking more past the movie, but we get obviously, like I said, more revealed information as you watch this movie, and you find out that Annie had a brother who stated that that's why he killed himself, was because
trying to put something in him.
And you find out that her father starved himself as well, which when you first hear those things, you're like, what a tragic fucking character, honestly.
Yeah, but also when you hear it for the first time, you're just kind of like, okay, like this is just horror movie shit, right?
Yeah, but of
like,
course
your
it's
whole
like the
family's
worst.
dead.
This is like the worst person who's ever, the worst like that anybody's ever had.
Yeah, exactly.
But then you kind of come to realize that the same way, like, you could make a movie about like before Hereditary, this movie, and it would be still about the beginnings of this curse and how it makes you really think that like the dad starved himself on purpose, knowing because that was the only way he could not get conquered by payment. And then obviously the brother knew what he had to do, but it's like Payman's been very pissed about trying to get back into this world for a long
Payman's
time.
probably been trying to get into this family now for probably 40 years.
Yeah, and he's like Charlie, boy,
Because Payman is just an entity. He's like, Charlie, a boy. Fuck.
Yeah.
It's a girl.
He's a demon, but the one thing he wants is a penis, apparently.
He's like, I'm not a real demon unless I have a dick.
Yeah. So, but I think those are the things that I was talking about where, and the first time that I watch it, especially not expecting that type of horror movie, you might just let that information brush up on you. And it's all there for you to kind of, what made me kind of connect that is that I feel like the dad would kind of know why it's not as easy to say, oh, I feel bad for him, is don't you think he would kind of know marrying into this family, the dynamic of the person that she's marrying is with her mother?
Yeah, and obviously you can't choose who you love, but then if you could, maybe he wouldn't have chosen to love her, knowing that like your mom's crazy, your brother's dead, your dad's dead, like our kids, like, because she's like, oh, my husband is the one who kept Peter away from my mother. And then Charlie's like, when I finally gave in and I pretty much gave her Charlie or whatever. Like, so the dad honestly saved Peter's life for those first 16, 17 years of like, fuck.
The issue is, though, I think, not the issue, or the reason why I think he's so comfortable being like that is because Annie does seem to say that she didn't have a relationship with her mother for the past years before, up until she started getting like sick, she said. And that's what kind of made it awkward, because she was like, I have to act like I care, but I don't. But she does, obviously, because she has
of course you're going to care no matter what type of relationship you have with your mother. If your mother was to die like that, you're going to feel some type of way, whether you're going to cry on day one or whatever.
Which is something they talk about too, right? Because she's like, why am I not crying? And he's
this family is just so disconnected, so fucking disassociated from their feelings, and because they're fucking just off a sick perk every morning. You know what I mean?
Off the perk 90.
Yeah. The real demon is the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
Right? This is
they're off the Quaaludes.
I don't really actually feel this way, but I'm like, this is the whitest fucking movie ever, right? Because like these fools are addicted to fucking pills, and they're possessed.
You know what to add to your joke in terms of the second half of the movie that really makes it like, oh my god, is the fact that what is important is highlighted in this book, right?
Oh yeah.
It's like,
hey, by the way,
it's such a white,
just
like,
in case you were missing, what was the point of this?
Not that I was gonna frame the cameras for you to read those words, but here's the highlighter.
Just to riff and joke a little bit more, isn't it the funniest thing in the world that they were like, Ari Aster was like, okay, we need to drive the plot forward. She has this peanut allergy. Okay, you know what teenagers do at parties? They bake fucking chocolate walnut cakes.
Yeah.
I have been to a few teenage house parties.
Food is never.
When I was a young man. Like, you'd be lucky to get a slice of Little Caesars. Yeah. Just making cake.
Yeah, right.
Like, no, that never happened in the history.
In the same party where they're smoking weed in the parents' room, right? Mm-hmm. These are contrasting parties. Ari Aster's never.
He was on the
Fraud
Euphoria
watch.
wave before Sam Levinson, bro.
Yeah,
he's like, bro, they live in these sick Utah mansions and like they're just fucking getting lit off the bong, bro. They're making chocolate cake. It's just fucking typical teenager shit, right? It's the sick and twisted mind of Ari Aster, bro. Teenagers making chocolate cakes.
But again, I just think the movie just slowly has all these moments for the characters to really reveal themselves to you, and then maybe at the moment that you first watch this movie, you might not be kind of worried to what things you should be looking out for. But even as simple as when you do see that at the funeral, and she talks about how my mother would be surprised if so many people showed up. That's already like a clue for you. Be like, why is there so many people here? Then you're a daughter, and you're sort of like, why are there so many people here? And then to later find out, like, oh, all these people are in it.
So, kind of getting off the movie a little bit. You know, we're not really here to gush for 2 hours like we did about John Wick. You know,
Oh yeah.
I just want to kind of round out the technical side of the film because one of the reasons this is also one of my favorite movies of all time. I've been meaning to say that this is a top 10 movie for me, like one of my 10 favorite movies of all time. It's got to do with the cinematography, which I don't think this is the most gorgeous movie. I just think it's so well shot for a horror movie, and with all that dollhouse aspect and just the subtleness of the horror when it sets in, right? That's all thanks to Paweł. I'm gonna fuck this up. Paweł Porgozowski or whatever, right? He's a Polish cinematographer. He's I believe he did Midsummer, and he might be doing Beau is Afraid as well.
He is.
And also Colin Stetson, the guy who did the music. This is probably my favorite soundtrack of the past 5 years, and it's tied with If Beale Street Could Talk. That's my other favorite
Babylon?
score. Fuck no. That's what this movie was missing, bro. It was a Voodoo Mama.
Cocaine Room.
Why do you have to bring that up every time? God damn, I should have never let you know that I hated that fucking score.
You know, also to bring back to the cinematographer, he shot Fresh too, which I think was a good aspect of that movie.
Yeah, that is a good looking movie, and it kind of has that similar lighting, you know, like it's kind of dim, but it isn't one of those movies now where you post a screenshot and you're like, what the fuck, did they forget that you're supposed to light the movie, you know?
He shot
Because like if he did look at Midsummer, you know, and it's like it's proof of range.
Yeah, exactly. He did Nobody too, which I haven't seen, but I kind of am interested in
Bob
seeing it.
Odenkirk's John Wick.
Yeah.
I have been meaning to see that. But yeah, those two, Colin Stetson and Paweł Porgozowski or whatever, just fucking A+. They contribute just as much to this movie as Toni Collette and Ari Aster. And man, that last song when fucking Peter becomes Payman and those, like, I don't know if it's like guitar strings or, you know, whatever. It almost feels like something you would see in Dune or Interstellar, like that.
Some Mandy stuff.
You know what I mean? Just, it's so fucking good. And I don't know if this makes me a weirdo or whatever, but like that's one of my comfort soundtracks, Hereditary. Like if I'm like, oh, I want to listen to a movie soundtrack, I listen to that, or if Beale Street Could Talk. And I wouldn't be surprised if I'm like my Apple end of the year thing, you see like the
soundtrack.
Hail Payman. You know what I mean? Like,
Hail Payman. Yeah.
What do you do when I'm doing the dishes? What are you listening to? Hail Payman by Colin Stetson. You know?
And there's gonna be the Beau is Afraid soundtrack is gonna be blasting this year. I guess because I feel like we haven't, before we wrap up, couldn't go too far without saying that, kind of talked about it, but yeah, Toni Collette is really, really good at this. And
wow, flaming hot take you have there.
But this was, I remember
Wait,
there
are
being.
you gonna say next she was robbed by the Academy?
I was gonna say that the online joke was for a long time that she was robbed from the Academy, but yeah, this movie wasn't even nominated. Like I think we were talking about. This is this is after Moonlight, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about obviously how the Academy has no love for genre films, but I think that's the only reason this movie to me for a long time did stand out. I think her performance, like you said, her very famous speech that she goes on to
the I am your mother,
her son. I think yesterday I was watching it, I just really, it's always powerful every time you see it. And I know almost all the words. They use it for memes now, and it doesn't make me laugh at all. I think to be able to, and I think this kind of talks about, because we know that she's doing Mafia Mia or Mafia Mama, is that Ari asked her to be able to, like you said, he's like, I'm making this role for her, but for her to draw that out is not something, and no disrespect to her, I was unfamiliar with their game, as Shaq says.
Yeah, at the time, you've been unfamiliar.
I was just so blown away, because it's such pure acting, and it's to a point where I think maybe we'll talk. Well, I was gonna bring it up next week because of Midsummer, but Florence Pugh was talking about how she felt so guilty and she had such a hard time playing Danny. And I feel like Toni Collette kind of went through the same type of like self-training here. I just think that some of the pain that she shows in this movie feels so real. And I, for a second, don't really... There's some movies where I'm just watching it and I'm like, you know, they had to tap into some stuff, but you could tell they're just reading the script. But here it just kind of felt like she really had lost so much personally. And
you know what I was going to say is that she feels like a real person.
Yeah,
like Kate Blanchett as Lydia
Tar, yeah.
Where you're like, I believe that that Annie Graham existed and that she was cursed and that she suffered so much. And not only is it the I'm your mother scene, but you know the seances, the AA meetings. There's just so many when she's crying when Charlie dies and she's just sobbing in a way that, you know, I don't wish it on anybody, but everybody's going to go through the moment when your parents die. And not to get too into it or whatever, be like, but that was real. Like, you know, like I've seen that, I've heard that, I know what that was like. So it hit me in a way like where like I could get emotional just thinking about that scene of her crying, you know, because I'm like, I've heard that. And anybody who's been through this situation knows what that sounds like, you know, when you're watching someone you love get buried. And it just hits me in a way where I'm just like, wow, like Toni Collette like transcends acting in this movie, and it feels just beyond real.
I think that's why I said
it's one of my favorite acting performances. I'm not even gonna cap, not just because we're talking about it, not just because there's a recency bias. This is one of my favorite movie performances.
Yeah, I think that's where, to me, where the movie is its strongest, his highlight of why it stands out to me for so much is because of her. So I'm in full agreement with you that I think it's in my top 10. If the movie's not in my top 10, her performance is in my top 10.
You know, the I'm Your Mother scene is playing right now on the TV, and as big and loud as that scene is, you know what really gets me is when the dad's like, enough, and she looks at him and she whimpers and she holds out the fork and she's like, fine, you know, where it's just like, you know, that she has so much more to say. There's just something else there. And she the heartbreak and when she says that, you know, because she knows that she's just crossed the line, but you know, she's crossed these lines many, many times, you know. I'm not going to judge her as a mother or whatever, but yeah, that almost kills me more than the big, you know, you're sitting there with that fucking face on your face, you know, and it just, oh man, this movie fucking breaks me, dude.
I guess what I was going to say is I think the true horror, the big discussion that I've seen with this movie is like, yeah, a lot of people just don't think it's scary. But I think maybe it might be a fortunate thing for some to say, but like you said, the horror lies in knowing the feeling that it is to lose somebody like that, which is the worst feeling that you could have. I mean, I've been lucky enough to only have it in small fragments and not towards people that I've been too close to. But like you said, it's something that is inevitable. It's something that I think sometimes I get just sad thinking about. So
like imagine when it happens,
yeah,
how sad you'll actually be.
And or even when small things happen, you know, pet, like just losses of pets have been just as like grave, more than like I wouldn't wish it on anybody. So what I wanted to say though is that for you to tap into that feeling and know that is one of the scariest things ever, but then also to find out that it is completely out of your hands. That it was never like, there's nothing that you could have done, that you were just a pawn in the whole game. And I think, like you said, if you've ever really had the feeling personally, you've felt that that's what was happening. And whether that's, obviously it wasn't real, but this movie plays into that whole feeling. And I think to people who this movie is really, really scary to, it's that aspect. And of course, you have the stuff later that, like, you know, when Charlie's head comes off and you see that seed, it's disgusting. It really is.
The shock value is insane.
Yeah.
Right? And it hits every time. You're like, oh, fuck.
Because every time I see it, I'm like, it's disgusting. It looks so real. I told my brother, I was like, I'm supposed to believe that within like a day, all these maggots are, but it works for the movie. You know what I mean? Like it's effective. I don't know if it'd be that many maggots in that short amount of time, but it's
mostly ants.
Yeah, it is.
But
it is.
You got to think about this, bro. On a rainy night, because like, you know, we're in Southern California and it doesn't rain that often, but you know, sometimes it'll rain, right? And all of a sudden in your kitchen, you're like, where the fuck did these million ants come from, right? Because they're hiding from the rain or whatever, right? Now imagine if it actually was a piece of rotting flesh that had been baking in the sun for, however long. Like, no, it would happen. Leave you want to have a science experiment? Leave a piece of fried chicken outside in your backyard. Like, see how fast that shit gets covered in ants. Now imagine a human head.
But I think that's where the movie pulls. Like, you kind of talked about the lever, and we obviously get Tony Collette taking her head off. Alex Wolff's character banging his face into the desk. The dad getting on fire. Those all seem though very sub-complimentary to the overall horror of what it is to be a pawn in this curse that your mother put on your family. For what reason? We don't ever fucking know.
Riches.
Why she's that's
For greed.
That's true,
Literally
because
for greed.
it's true, because she says like all of this will reveal itself and it'll be worth it at the end.
Getting back to the jokes a little bit here, one of the funniest parts in this movie is when Annie realizes what the hell's going on and who her mother is and how she's known Joan, and she goes and looks in the scrapbook, and it's the picture of the grandma, like Scrooge McDuck. They're all throwing gold shekels over her.
Yeah,
that's got to be one of the funniest things I've seen. It is like, this is why we're cursed.
I also think it is funny because she just completely had this. She says she's a very secretive lady, but she completely had all of these pictures of these things happening, and not until she died did she think about, I should probably look at the stuff my mom cherished so much.
Hey, low key, not to be a hater, that's also the plot of Paranormal Activity. Do you remember that the grandmother made a deal with Toby the devil about giving?
I forgot. And I'd be like, why is this? Yeah, she put us down for this debt, and we have no idea, and supposedly it's gonna be and big, and that's okay, and that's my fault.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just, she becomes just much more of a tragic character because you don't realize in the same context of the movie that not only is she literally has the worst luck. It's not just that all these things have happened by coincidence. She literally is cursed.
There is no coincidence.
Yeah.
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 You know what? One last thing I wanted to say before we really wrapped it up. Well, I got two things. Doing my, my little research before the pod. I don't know how factual this is, but apparently in 2004, this is a true story, by the way. Some guy, I'm not gonna give out their names or whatever. There was a guy who was driving home from a party, right? And his friend was inebriated in the back seat and stuck his head out the window to to throw up or whatever. And he was decapitated by a phone pole. And the guy drove away, and he fell asleep on the side of the road. And some guy and his toddler found him the next day. And a lot of people think that that's where the idea came from Charlie being decapitated, but Ari Aster never commented on if that was the story that inspired that scene.
I mean, I feel like
that makes it even scarier, It's like, fuck that, or more tragic, It's like, that's a real thing that has happened. It isn't just some movie, trick to kind of forward the plot of like, oh, then she got decapitated.
My funny take on that, in terms of just going back to the movie, is, did Payman know that if he ate the peanuts, like, he could be in perfect line to get his head decapitated? Those are the questions of like.
Yeah, that's where you're like, damn, how big brain 4D chess could this demon
because
be,
before
right? He's like, tonight's my night.
And this was high, so he's not gonna be driving straight. And because the other aspect that so just kind of a quick thing, my brother had been wanting to watch this movie forever. A couple of months ago, he did watch it with the girl that he was dating. Completely just told me he didn't understand it. Neither did her. But just like yesterday when I was watching it, I was explaining him, just trying to break it down to him in terms of why this movie is like, this is why people like it. This is why this movie is smart. This is why this movie. There's the deer on the road though. Mm-hmm. And obviously anybody could have placed that there. Who killed the deer? Why is it standing there? I think that's the reason. I completely forgot that that's the reason he swerves. Mm-hmm. Not that it's just like, oh, this guy's kind of just driving close to the pole.
So it is a deer?
There's a deer on the road.
You want to know what I thought it was? Is the grandma's body. I'd always thought it was.
Oh, like he pictured it or
no, because the grave is robbed before
by that time,
I believe. And it's like, and the thing that makes you think that that was planned is because the phone pole has the painted logo on it, right? Yeah. So you're like, is Joan or who these other cult members, did they rob the grave and just putting this body in a bunch of different places to fuck with this family? Like, Oh, look, you had to swerve from your dead grandma's body, and then oh, look, we like how did they get it into the attic? You know what I mean? Just
That's
like
insane.
Those small
Yeah.
things like that. And then like the turn that the dad has, where he's like, it was probably you who dug her up. Like when he turns on Annie, you know?
Yeah.
Oh man,
But
that's for smarter people than us.
cause no, but like yesterday I was watching it because it's like, yeah,
But it
the
could be a
second
deer, sorry.
the second you see the post, I'm like, it's obviously planned, and they make. I mean,
Well, there's no
they
accidents.
talk about cinematography being the language of cinema. It literally shows you the emblem on the post. So this is planned, right? And that's where I'm like, so what was the point of payment being like, I need to eat the peanuts, you know, or like I don't be like, it doesn't matter to me.
Swerved, but her head wouldn't have been out the window.
It's like it doesn't matter to me because who cares? But I'm also like, those are the things where I'm like,
But not to just give this movie a pass, but it's like, okay, movies are more like dreams than they are reality. So there's gonna be aspects of them always where you're like, that's a stretch, but okay, I can ride with that, you know. And it's like, it only depends on how good or worse the rest of the movie surrounding the inconceivable thing is, whether you're gonna choose to like ride with it or not.
I guess the fact that it's not unrealistic because you're telling me of a story of where it happened, and I guess maybe the aspects there were maybe that he was a little buzzed and he was driving a little too close to the curb, or that there's this post that for some reason was really close. But the fact that the movie states that this is planned is when it completely is like, well, okay, so if this is planned, be like, how, damn, you could meticulously plan this, right? Because if the movie didn't go with the premise that it was planned, then I don't have any of these questions. It was an accident. But it's the fact that they, like you said, even you thought maybe it's the grandma's body out there, since there's such a meticulous group of people. It just made me, when I was watching yesterday, be like, dang, I guess I have to just go with the plot that they've been planning this for like the get-go, man. Everything.
Yeah. So the last thing I kind of wanted to wrap up with is, besides us, possibly the biggest fan of this movie is Martin Scorsese himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what more of what more of a high mark you need as a movie fan to be like, okay, this must be something special. Martin fucking Scorsese decided to go out of his way to talk about how special this movie is. And I will say, because of Hereditary, I've gone back and watched the movies that Scorsese says he believes influenced Hereditary, or like the type of horror that Hereditary is, being like The Changeling or Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now, which deals with a couple losing their family. Losing their child, and like, you know, it's got witches and shit like that. Rosemary's Baby, right? The Changeling is one with George C. Scott, the guy from fucking, you know, from Dr. Strangelove, right? And that's just another one of these like it's probably the least similar of the other two that I mentioned, but yeah, like I've gone back and watched them, and just because Martin Scorsese recommended them, you know, and because, like I said, Hereditary is one of those movies where I'm like, I want to learn more. I want to see more movies like this. So like, what are the things that he looked at for influence and inspiration? And yeah, I just kind of wanted to. We don't have to. That'll be like the last thing I really say, but I just wanted to bring that up.
I just will say that there's a certain, you know, everybody who really loves films has a director to really look up to, and I don't think that's something that's like a secrecy. And I think Martin Scorsese has done more than enough to deserve his respect, especially from someone like us too, right? But I will say that there's like Quentin Tarantino kind of has gone out of his way to say that he doesn't really share anymore what his movies that are new that he really likes. And I think as somebody who's a fan of the art, you do still want to hear your favorite directors talk about, like Steven Spielberg said he loved everything ever all at once. And I think I had gotten into this stupid dumb Twitter argument about this where like somebody thought Steven Spielberg wasn't going out of his way to recognize too many young new films, and whether I completely disagree with that statement, people always want to see that from their favorite directors. They do wish there was a list or something, and I know that's too primitive, but when someone like Martin Scorsese goes out of their way to praise any of the movies that we've watched in the theater, or when he just takes out of his time to talk about how he enjoyed Pearl, I think that as a fan just really makes you turn your eye, because who would know more about the art of cinema than certain people like him, right?
Yeah, I mean, Steven Spielberg like you said, when he mentioned Everything Everywhere All at Once, he said that he loves watching young filmmakers because that's where he's taking his inspiration from.
Yeah.
You know, I think he's taken enough inspiration from Orson Welles or Akira Kurosawa
Yeah.
or Andrei Tarkovsky or whoever. You know, I'm not saying these are correlations between Steven Spielberg's films. I'm just, you know, throwing out
He's like
legendary names in there.
Chastahelsky. It's
Yeah, he's like, yo, John Wick.
yeah, I'm gonna make Indy look like
No,
that.
but I really do love like Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese going out of their way to praise the younger generation because it just validates it for us. You know, it's like I'm not crazy thinking that Ari Aster is a special filmmaker. You know, and I know I'm not the only one who has this opinion of him, but I'm just saying when you hear someone like Martin Scorsese say it, you're like, see, I knew it. Who better than Martin Scorsese? Oh, I'm sorry that Tom 69420 said he didn't like Hereditary. Guess who does?
I guess because the other coin side of that would be that the ultra hater, you know, some other director, I'm sure I just don't care enough to know their opinion based on this, would say that there hasn't been any good. Well, Quentin Tarantino's come out of his way and said this is one of the worst eras of filmmaking of all time, you know, and when you hear that, it's like, so I'm supposed to believe like there's none of these movies that have come out are good.
Yeah, so everything I've seen with my eyes is bad because a guy I really look up to said that.
Yeah, so and it starts to become that just seems like a pretentious answer from him because
It's a boomer answer.
I think if
there's no good
you
music, there's no good movies, there's no good TV shows, everybody's stupid now.
as he is so much quoted himself as a student of the art, as somebody who worked at, you know, the video store and all of those cheap B movies, those are the movies he likes. So I'm supposed to believe Hereditary is not as good as any of these B movies he watched because he says so. And I think that at one point is when they talk about like you have to self-analyze and self-criticize your own viewings. But hey, when one of the greatest filmmakers of all time agrees with your point, I think that's far enough validation. Like, you know what I mean?
We'll wrap it up there. Join us next week as we cover his second film, Midsommar. We're going to see Beau is Afraid maybe on the 14th, so there might be a gap between the episodes in case we don't see it till the 21st when it releases wide. But, you know, stick around for Ari Aster month. Tell us why you love him. Tell us why you hate him. If you tell me you hate him, you're going to get your ass blocked, so be careful. Thank you for checking back into the Grand Cinema Hotel as always. I'm Gus. I'm joined by Alvaro as always. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, do what you got to do to keep the show going. And, you know, Satoni.
Bye.